There is a strange paradox at the heart of travel. On the surface, the traveler appears to be in constant danger, exposed to unknown territories, foreign customs, unpredictable roads, and the whims of fate that unfold beyond the comfort of home.
Do you ever feel in danger on your travels? Do I ever feel in danger on my travels? Not really. No, I can't say I feel in danger. I mean, the only danger really is loneliness. That's the thing that gets me the most. So it's like, for the first week when I'm on my own traveling, it's fine. But then I'm traveling to places where I'm not going to meet another tourist or another, English speaker. So I'm always having to talk in Russian the whole time. It tires the brain and you can't form a connection so easily with people because I don't speak fluent Russian. You can't have the laugh that you can with someone who speaks your own language, right? Who's fluent in English. You can have a better laugh with them, obviously. And so it kind of gets a bit like, it gets a bit lonely. But I mean, there's always WhatsApp and stuff, but it's not the same. It'd be good to travel with someone. I envy people who have channels where they travel with people. That's why it's so much fun traveling with a lean chick. It's like, at least, we can go for a few beers afterwards and stuff. Just someone to talk to that gets you, right? So, yeah. Do you think a woman could travel around the world? Yeah, absolutely. Listen, there's a lot of misconceptions that, something terrible is going to happen to you. And I really don't think that's the case. Okay, there are certain countries to avoid. Jay Bollocky. But, in Russia or Eastern Europe where I travel, or Cuba, or probably Bolivia or Mauritania, I don't know. But I think you'd be fine. I really do think that, So, yeah, I think a woman can travel around the world, as long as you use a certain amount of sense. Then yeah, have I ever thought of going to Iran? Your visa for British people is so difficult to get that I have this policy. If they make the visa so difficult for me, it means they don't want me to come. So it's like, I'm just not going to. However interesting I find the country, Iran's probably a fascinating country. It's got a history of 5,000 years, Persepolis, and all these things. Alexander the Great went through there. Ramesses the Great. But if your visa is that difficult for Brits, why would I bother? It's like, if you don't want my money, you don't want me, you don't want me to promote your company, why would I do it? So no, probably. Will I go?
Yet those who have wandered most often will tell you that the truest peril rarely comes from bandits, diseases, or border guards. It comes from silence, the kind that accumulates slowly in the absence of familiarity, the kind that lingers in the hollow space where language fails to connect. It is the loneliness that stretches across continents like an invisible map, a companion more faithful than any guidebook and more difficult to escape than any geopolitical boundary. The seasoned traveler learns early on that physical danger is almost always exaggerated in the imagination. Stories of abductions, attacks, or scams circulate endlessly, amplified by media and the collective anxieties of sedentary societies. Yet on the ground, in the markets of Eastern Europe, the alleyways of Havana, or the provincial train stations of the former Soviet Union, what one encounters more often is hospitality, curiosity, and the quiet pulse of everyday life. Is not that threats do not exist, they do, and caution is never unwarranted, but they are rarely the defining feature of the journey. What defines it is the confrontation with oneself, stripped of the comforts and certainties that home provides. Loneliness is the true crucible. In the first days of a journey, it disguises itself as freedom, the exhilarating sense of being unmoored from schedules and obligations, of answering to no one but the whims of the road. But as the days stretch into weeks, a different sensation emerges. Without a shared language, conversations become transactional, stripped of nuance and humor. The jokes that rely on cultural references fall flat. The small talk that binds people together in everyday life becomes laborious. For a traveler fluent in the language of the land, the world opens easily. But for one operating with limited vocabulary, enough to order a meal or ask for directions, not enough to forge deep connections, the isolation becomes palpable. This loneliness is not merely emotional but cognitive. Language is not only a tool for communication, but a framework for thought. To operate in a foreign language is to live at the edge of one's intellectual capacity, constantly translating, guessing, and adjusting. The mind tires quickly, and the self begins to feel attenuated, stretched thin by the effort of existing in a mode that is both familiar and foreign. It is here, in the tension between comprehension and incomprehension, that the traveler begins to confront a deeper truth. Travel is not just about exploring the world, but about exploring the limits of one's own subjectivity. Companionship, when it exists, transforms this experience. To have someone with whom to share the absurdities, frustrations, and small triumphs of the road is to alleviate the weight of solitude. A conversation over beers after a long day of wandering, a shared glance when the unexpected occurs, these moments root the traveler, anchoring them in a social reality that otherwise slips through their fingers. The envy of those who travel together is not trivial. It reflects a fundamental human need for recognition, for the presence of another consciousness alongside one's own. Yet the solitary traveler persists, drawn by the purity of the experience and the self-knowledge it engenders. And in this solitary mode, one encounters another common anxiety, the fear that the world is inherently unsafe, particularly for those who do not conform to certain demographics. The question of whether a woman can travel alone, for instance, often arises, laden with cultural assumptions and fears. Those who have traversed the globe repeatedly tend to respond with reassurance. Most of the world is not waiting with hostility for the lone female traveler. The vast majority of people, regardless of geography, are not predators but participants in the same daily struggle for dignity, livelihood, and connection. That said, prudence remains necessary. Some places demand more vigilance than others, shaped by their political climates, histories, or social norms. There are regions where local attitudes toward gender, nationality, or race may complicate the traveler's experience. But these are exceptions rather than rules. The narrative that travel is inherently perilous, especially for women, serves more to reinforce societal fears than to reflect actual conditions on the ground. With awareness, preparation, and respect for local contexts, the journey is possible for anyone. Another dimension of travel that rarely receives attention is the bureaucratic barrier. Borders are not merely lines on maps, they are systems of control, expressions of sovereignty, and often reflections of historical wounds. The difficulty of obtaining a visa is a form of communication in itself, a subtle but unmistakable message about who is welcome and who is not. When a nation makes entry so arduous that the process becomes prohibitive, the traveler might rightly interpret this as disinterest. The refusal is not personal but political, yet its effect is the same. The potential for cultural exchange diminishes, and curiosity is redirected elsewhere. This negotiation with borders and bureaucracy underscores a fundamental irony of travel in the modern era. Never before have we been so connected, so capable of seeing distant lands from the screens of our devices. Yet never before have the mechanisms of control been so intricate. Passports, visas, biometrics, these are the currencies of mobility, and they remind us that travel, for all its romantic connotations, is also an act regulated by power. The refusal to subject oneself to excessive bureaucratic scrutiny can itself be a statement. If a country's gates are closed, there are countless others whose doors are open. The deeper question that arises from these reflections concerns the nature of travel itself. What is it that compels a person to leave the familiar and venture into the unknown, to accept loneliness as a companion and bureaucracy as a barrier? The answer is not uniform. For some, it is a pursuit of knowledge, the desire to witness history where it unfolded, to feel the weight of centuries beneath one's feet. For others, it is a search for perspective, a way to understand one's own culture by encountering others. And for many, it is simply the joy of motion, the intoxicating freedom of stepping outside the scripted routines of daily life. Yet even in its most personal manifestations, travel is never purely individual. It is always shaped by larger historical forces, colonial legacies, geopolitical tensions, global economies. To move through the world as a tourist or a wanderer is to participate, however unconsciously, in these currents. The choice of destination, the ease of passage, the reception one receives, all are conditioned by histories that long precede the traveler's journey.